What is up, and welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Practical Planner podcast. I am your co-host, Thomas Kopelman, co-founder of AllStreet Wealth and head of community at wealth.com. Here with me, as always, Anne Rhodes, chief legal officer at wealth.com. Anne, just going to ask you how you're doing, but still sick, right?
Exactly. Although doing a little bit better now that I got the fun antibiotics.
There we go. I feel bad for you. I swear every podcast we have, somehow you're just running through a sickness. It makes me a little nervous for when I start to have kids in the next few years.
It is on par for the course, you know. You choose to live your life this way.
What else can you expect, right?
Exactly.
Well, I'm excited to do this episode. You know, I actually heard you have a presentation about this at the end of last year, really talking about, should your revocable trust own your business? So we're going to talk about, should your revocable trust own the business in this episode? And then the next episode, we're really going to go down, should your irrevocable trust own the business? Two very different things, two very different levels of complexity, as probably everybody listening could know. Irrevocable side is going to start to make sense for people that have like big businesses growing quickly, high net worths. But I think this is an area on the revocable side that people overlook, right? Like I've tweeted about this all the time, kind of just talking about some of the issues that I have here. And people are always like, why would I have my trust own the business? So I'm really excited to have you talk about this and share this information to everybody in my network, because people always kind of argue with me on this point.
Well, I'm glad to give you a couple of arrows in your quiver for the next time you have this conversation, Thomas. If for those of you listeners who were at the Market Council conference, I think that's the talk that Thomas is referencing. So this will be a kind of slightly different take on that. But basically, if you are a business owner, and this is really geared at, you control somehow the business, you have significant, wealth, your net worth tied up in the business, then, how should you think about your own succession planning, right? Death and incapacity planning. And so this is where the revocable trust comes in and can be a really important tool for you, because you are literally operating a business. And depending on the structure of your business, the governance of your business, right? How many partners do you have with you? What role do you play in that business? It can be critical for you to not just provide for what happens to those shares when you pass away, or those interests when you pass away, and the economics of that, but also just the operation of the business must continue even if something were to happen to you. That's not death. It can be, being unavailable because you're taking a trip somewhere. It can be because you're going under surgery and, something critical is happening to the business where you need to vote, your shares or your interests. So for you, it is very important to consider doing some planning around that.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think in earlier episodes, we really talked about kind of this incapacitation planning, right? Like, there is a situation where you have a power of attorney or financial power of attorney, and they don't end up, allowing that, whether it's because they want it on their forms and you don't have it. And this kind of helps bypass that. Most people are going to say, hey, this is in your trust and you have this person designated and be able to make these decisions for you. Of course, we're going to accept it. But when I talk about this as one of the main pain points, people always say like, oh, so for the rare, very unlikely situation of incapacitation, people should go through all the complexity of setting up a trust, putting your business in a trust. What would you respond to that?
I mean, you get all the other advantages of having a trust. And that's the thing with powers of attorney, right? They can be very clunky. And at the point in time where that third party, which can be your partners, or it can be a bank or some third party, refuses it, you're out of luck, because you're literally incapacitated. You can't make a new power of attorney that complies with, what that third party was looking for. And sometimes the third parties are very savvy and they're like, well, I know you have this power of attorney and it's on the statutory form, which I'm technically, required to accept. But I need you to give me an indemnity so that if anything happens that you're not happy with under this power of attorney, I'm, protected, and you have to go look at somebody else for that. Just that clause, the indemnity being missing, which is never going to be in a statutory form, that's the reason why I got rejected. And so a trust, on the other hand, is literally a vehicle that can own shares. The trustee has all of the powers under law And on top of that, what you put into the trust agreement. So we'll talk about what's important in terms of provisions to put into your trust because it will own a business. But all of these powers are much more flexible than the power of attorney. So, the trust is really the best vehicle to make sure your business continues to operate.
Okay, that makes sense. I think when a lot of people hear this, they're viewing this through the lens of I own a business, right? So like maybe that makes sense, but I think there's this whole other side of the world. We don't have to spend too much time, but I want to note it that like if you own private investments and you have some individual ownership there, a lot of times there it does still make sense to have it be in the trust too, because if you were to pass away, this is in your name. Very similar to a joint taxable account, right? Like you want to make sure that it flows through and avoids probate as well.
Right, exactly. And on the probate front, let me put it to you this way. You really don't want a judge overseeing how to run your business and, how to draw from it the economics, so that your beneficiaries, your loved ones, can take all the benefits of your hard work during your life in this business. So, yes, very important.
I think everybody probably agrees that they don't want that. I mean, at least I would hope so. But I think let's go through kind of some of the main reasons you'd want to do this, right? So one is incapacitation. Like, let's kind of list these out. What would be some of the other reasons why you think this is important?
So something else that is important too is, you are running your business, and when you're thinking about your estate plan, you're thinking about a lot of family matters as well and personal assets that are going to go through the same vehicle, right? That same revocable trust if you were incapacitated or passed away. You might want to think about also how a trust is really great for bifurcating, meaning separating out the roles. So you can have one trustee, let's say your spouse, who knows and understands, the needs of your family, be in charge of your personal bank account, what happens to your home, etc. But then have a business partner potentially be the person who's in charge of the business side of things because your spouse would have no idea how to run your business, right? And so those are flexible structures that you could put in a trust as well.
That's a good one. I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense, right? Most people's spouse probably are not well equipped to take over and run the business, which not to get it too far into it. That's why we have buy-sell agreements and funded by life insurance. People get paid out. What else do we have? Unless you want to add, I didn't know if you wanted to add something.
I think we can talk a little bit since we started dipping our toes into this of like special provisions or special, legal documentation that you'll have to think about because you're a business owner and you're thinking of putting that asset, the business into your trust. So along with thinking about bifurcating, the trustee roles, a couple of other things that stand out. The first thing is, does your business even allow you to put the asset, the stock or the membership interests into a trust? So here in San Francisco, I worked with a ton of VCs and, managing partners of big VCs, and a lot of their net worth was in the stock. And you always hear like, oh, especially in California, to avoid probate, you should fully fund your trust. We worked extensively with the counsel, the in-house counsel at these VCs to make sure that we had the provisions within the partner's trust, right, the managing director's trust, so that the company felt comfortable that the spouse wouldn't have enough, control, that, we had all of the controls in place within the trust so that, it wouldn't affect the day-to-day operations of the company. In effect. So you may have to do that work with your partners and with the governing instruments of your own company to make sure that it's okay for you to put your shares or your interests into your trust. That's number one.
That's obviously step number one, right? Understanding, is the operating agreement created in a way where this is allowed? If not, you can always get new operating agreements drafted. I'm sure most of the C Corps, these bigger businesses that you talked about, like that's probably done. But for a lot of the smaller LLCs where people go to LegalZoom or do something else online, those might not be in the operating agreements, where you might need to pay an attorney to redraft those.
Exactly. And this is where it is worth having an attorney step in and help a little bit. In the beginning, when you're just setting up, sure, maybe you downloaded a form off LegalZoom or wherever, but at the point in time where you have an operating business worth preserving that has enough economic value that you start worrying, like, I want my loved ones to get the benefits of this, that's the time where, it pays to have an attorney look at those provisions. Some other provisions to pay attention to are restrictions upon death, where the transfer goes upon your death. Sometimes the LC agreement just automatically has a provision, right? It has to go to so and so. And so you might want to see if your business partners are are open to overriding that and letting your trust take over where those shares go. And another thing, of course, is transfer restrictions. I think, Thomas, you kind of talked about that a little bit, but it's, rights of first refusal. So you've passed away, and basically you give your business partners, an ability to cash out your estate or cash out, your beneficiaries by having some sort of, sell rights. And so those are things that you can, intentionally put into your documents so that's important to you, or remove from them if flexibility is more important to you. But you kind of need to have, your business governance documents talk to your succession plan, to your trust, and the two to coordinate.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. What else do we need to go into as it relates to this topic and understanding the importance? I think we've hit on a couple key reasons why to do it. We've talked about the governing documents and making sure that that's there. But is this changed by different states? Obviously, we can't go into every single state, but it sounds like, California, obviously, everything I hear is everybody should have a trust in California. Maybe that's different in other states. Are there states where this does not really make sense?
I honestly don't think so. I think that trust planning, at this point, except maybe Louisiana, to be honest, is it's a pretty well-oiled path for business owners. And so third parties understand that. You actually have things like voting trusts and like purposeful, trust owning parts of businesses, because it is such an effective way of controlling, how the business is run and who has power to affect the operations of the business. And so there are all sorts of trusts out there. Yours would just be another form. The other thing to mention, though, is irrevocable trusts, because your revocable trust, or even your will, could form continuing irrevocable trusts underneath them. So think your marital trust, credit shelter trust, maybe a trust for a younger child or a younger beneficiary. And so you also have to have your trust document provide for the continuation of that business through, the document. So let me give you a couple of examples. And this touches on state law, which I think you were kind of hinting at. Across the United States, most states have pretty stringent, prudent investor rules. So you as a trustee, if you own, assets in for the benefit of whoever the beneficiary is, you have a lot of duties not to do wrong by the beneficiaries. And so there are all sorts of, duties, like you have to do well across the beneficiaries instead of picking one over another, all sorts of different rules. But one of them has to do with investments. And this is important. You guys as financial advisors need to know this. But the baseline law is that you have to invest the property as you would a prudent investor. And you have to take into account diversification of the assets. So all of a sudden, if you're the trustee and nothing in the trust overrides this prudent investor rule, then you have to go and diversify assets. If the business is struggling, you basically have to get rid of the business, but maybe it's a temporary thing, it basically, the prudent investor rule is completely counter to owning, a significant portion of the trust being this operating company, and all of the, worth or the wealth within that trust being tied up in an operating business. So what you need is for your trust to override the prudent investor rule and say, I actually allow my trustee to hold my family business or whatever business, because I understand that if I didn't override this rule, then the trustee has a legal duty to get rid of it. And that's not at all what I want for my beneficiaries, right? I actually want this family business to stay here.
Totally. I mean, nobody, that's funny to think about, right? Like, I can think of a client of mine who basically had a weird situation where his partner passed away and he's the trustee and he's managing this really large trust. And a large part of it is their business that should sell for a lot of money this year. But thinking about that rule, like, it's a very concentrated trust with 90% being this one primary business. Just having to sell that just because of that rule would definitely not be what their goal is.
Exactly, exactly. So make sure that you look for those types of provisions and actually give an affirmative power to the trustee to continue running your business, to liquidate it if they need to reincorporate, to consolidate, to do mergers, whatever it may be, just the same way that you would have full rights in your own hands to do what's best for your business.
Not legal advice here, but let's just think about somebody like me, right? So I own an S Corp. I live in Indiana. I own 85%. I have a partner. We have, buy sell agreement. We haven't funded it through life insurance because this last year was our first full year of really having revenue and profit. The year before, right? Like year one, it was like, is the valuation enough? If you have 110,000 of revenue in year one, how much life insurance do you need? But, the next point is I'm working on setting up my trust, and you start to think through like, hey, is this a pretty good example of the time where, hey, let's move it into the trust for all of those reasons, even though I do have a partner who could make financial decisions for me if I was unable to.
Yes. So for you, Thomas, I would say I would recommend you looking into putting your stock into your revocable trust. Because it's revocable, you can take it out if you ever needed to. So let's say, 10 years from now, your business is worth, millions and millions, and you're actually thinking even of doing tax planning, wealth transfer strategies. Having your stock in your trust and your revocable trust does not hurt, because you can just transfer that stock straight into, an irrevocable trust. So it is still very flexible, but what it does is allow you to provide for incapacity in case something were to happen to you. You're young enough that maybe you don't need to worry about it, but I don't want anybody ever to think that way, because you just never know, honestly.
Yeah, and I think this comes back to like, the people who are saying to me like, do you really need to set this up? Is it worth it? Is it worth the money? But at the end of the day, right, like if I am going to go set up a trust anyways, I'm going to put my house in it, I'm going to put my assets inside of it, like the additional fee for that flexibility, for knowing that if anything happens, those decisions can be made. It's probably like an additional few $100s to what you're already paying. Probably worth it just for that safety side of things. Perfect. Is there anything that we haven't hit on for, this topic that we think people need to know?
No, I mean, I think for the next episode, we want to keep this one, lighter, and it's easy listening for you guys, because it's just part one of talking about businesses and succession planning, and also just thinking about trust owning businesses. And so for part two, I think we are very excited to talk about some wealth transfer strategies. I worked on a ton of those for clients whose net worth was really tied up in their businesses. And so hopefully you're looking forward to that episode.
That's where all the fun stuff happens, right? Like revocable trust, it's really great to have control and make sure things go well and avoid probate. Irrevocable is way more fun because we're talking about saving potentially millions of dollars on estate taxes. So I'm really excited for that one. But Anne, thanks for joining me as always. And everybody, thank you for listening. Again, we would really appreciate it if you would rate and subscribe to the podcast. We're going to keep putting out these great episodes, hopefully. And if you have any topics that you want us to talk about, reach out to either of us or reach out to the wealth.com team, and we'll make sure that we include it. So everybody, thank you again, and we will see you back in a couple weeks.